Dad, stop wasting my money on this garbage! The words hit me like a punch to the gut. There I was, sitting in Dallas's most expensive restaurant, watching my own son throw my grandson's birthday gift into the champagne bucket like it was trash. The $100 savings bond I'd carefully picked out for Shane's 10th birthday. 10 years of compound interest and life lessons reduced to garbage in 3 seconds. That's when I knew. The boy I'd raised was gone. Now, let me back up a minute and tell you who I am. Wade Carson, 59 years old. And if you'd met me 30 years ago, you'd have seen a guy with grease under his fingernails driving a beat-up Peterbilt down I-35. Vietnam veteran, Purple Heart recipient, and stubborn enough to build Southwest Transport Solutions from that single truck into a $15 million freight empire. But right now, I was just a broken-down grandfather watching his son humiliate him in front of half of Dallas's elite. See, we were at the Mansion restaurant, the kind of place where they charge you $50 for a steak and act like they're doing you a favor. Shane's 10th birthday party, and Nolan had invited every business contact he could think of. Hedge fund managers, real estate moguls, men in $10,000 suits who measured their worth by the size of their Rolexes. I sat at the edge of the table in my old suit, the one I'd bought for Crystal's funeral 3 years ago, trying to make myself invisible. The fabric was worn at the elbows, a stark contrast to the Italian silk my son was wearing. Nolan sat at the head like some kind of king, laughing too loud at every joke, pouring Dom Perignon like it was beer at a barbecue. "Grandpa," Shane whispered, tugging on my sleeve. Poor kid looked overwhelmed by all the fancy people and their fake smiles. "Did you bring it?" My heart melted a little. This boy was the only pure thing left in my family. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Nothing fancy, just a regular business envelope with Shane's name written in my scratchy handwriting. "Happy birthday, buddy," I said softly, handing it to him. "This is for your future." Shane's eyes lit up as he reached for it. That's when Nolan's hand shot out and snatched it away. "Here's what you need to understand about my son, Nolan Carson, 33 years old, MBA from SMU, and convinced he's smarter than the old man who built everything he owns. He'd never worked a day of manual labor in his life, never felt the sting of diesel exhaust or the ache in your back from loading freight for 16 hours straight. He ripped open the envelope like he was opening his mail, not his son's birthday gift. When he saw the savings bond, his face twisted into something ugly. $100, he announced, loud enough for the whole table to hear. The conversations died down, forks stopped moving, and suddenly every eye in that place was on us. $100. "Dad, are you serious?" "Nolan, please," I said, keeping my voice low, trying to salvage what was left of my dignity. "It's a bond. It matures. It teaches him about saving, about patience." But my son wasn't having it. He held up that bond like it was a diseased rat. "You want to teach him value? Look around you, Dad. This dinner costs $8,000. That's value. You giving him this scrap of paper is not a gift. It's an insult." Then he did the one thing I'll never forgive him for. He crumpled up that bond, 10 years of my love and hope for my grandson, and threw it into the ice bucket with the champagne. Just tossed it away like garbage. "Stop wasting my money on this garbage," he hissed. That's when his wife Tiffany decided to join the party. You remember Tiffany? Former Dallas Cowboys cheerleader who married my son for his bank account, not his personality. She leaned over to the woman next to her, but spoke just loud enough for me to hear. "You have to forgive him. He's getting senile. We let him live with us out of charity, but he just doesn't understand how the modern world works. He's a drain on our resources, but what can we do?" The guests chuckled. That polite, uncomfortable sound people make when they're watching someone else's humiliation. They looked at me with pity. The poor old father living off his successful son. The burden. The charity case. I looked at Shane. My grandson was staring at his plate, his face red with shame. He wanted to cry. Hell, so did I. But he knew better. Tiffany had trained him not to show emotion in public. That's when something inside me just broke. Or maybe it finally healed. I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs scraping against the marble floor like fingernails on a chalkboard. "Where are you going?" Nolan asked, annoyed. "We haven't cut the cake yet. Don't make another scene." "I'm going home," I said quietly. "I'm tired." "Suit yourself." He waved me off like I was a waiter he was dismissing. "Just don't expect the driver to take you. He's busy. You can take the bus. It's cheaper. Just your style." What Nolan didn't know was that I'd been planning for this moment for months. I walked out of that dining room with my head high, even though I could feel every eye in the place following me. The whispers started before I even reached the door. I could hear them talking about the poor old man and his ungrateful situation. The maitre d' looked at my worn shoes like I was tracking mud through his precious restaurant. But here's what none of them knew. I wasn't some broken-down charity case. I was a man with a plan. See, I'd been watching my son for the past 3 years, ever since I made the biggest mistake of my life and handed him the CEO title of Southwest Transport. I thought I was doing the right thing. Crystal had just died, I was grieving, and I figured it was time to step back and let the next generation take over. Big mistake. Huge. Now, you might be wondering how a guy who built a trucking empire could end up living like a servant in his own son's house. Let me paint you that picture. After Crystal's funeral, I was lost. 40 years of marriage, gone, in a heartbeat. The woman who'd stood by me through everything. The lean years when we ate ramen noodles for dinner, the long hauls when I was gone for weeks, the slow climb from one truck to a fleet of 200. She was my anchor, my conscience, my best friend. Without her, I felt like I was drowning. So when Nolan suggested I take a step back and let him run the company while I grieved, it seemed reasonable. He had his MBA, he was hungry, and he was my son. What could go wrong? Everything, as it turned out. Within 6 months, Nolan had moved me out of the main house, for my own comfort, he said, and into the converted garage apartment. 2 rooms, concrete floors, and the constant smell of motor oil. He called it my workshop space, but we both knew what it really was. Exile. Then came the financial controls. "Dad, you don't need to worry about money anymore," he'd say. "I'll handle everything." My credit cards got simplified into one account he managed. My allowance, yeah, my own son gave me an allowance, was $400 a month. Just enough to buy groceries and maybe a coffee now and then. But the worst part? The disrespect. The way he'd talk about me in front of his business partners like I wasn't even there. "The old man's losing it," he'd say with a laugh. "Can't even work his smartphone properly." I let it slide for 3 years. Told myself it was temporary, that he was just finding his footing, that eventually we'd work things out. But tonight, watching him destroy Shane's birthday gift in front of half of Dallas society, I realized the truth. My son wasn't finding his footing. He was burying me alive. I walked out to the parking lot where my old Ford F-150 was parked in the back corner, hidden behind all the BMWs and Mercedes like some embarrassing family secret. 20 years old, 200,000 miles, but still running strong. That truck represented something Nolan would never understand. The value of keeping what works instead of chasing what's shiny. I'd just unlocked the door when I heard footsteps running up behind me. Heavy breathing, expensive shoes slapping on asphalt. Dad, wait up!" For just a second, one foolish, hopeful second, I thought maybe my son was coming to apologize. Maybe seeing the hurt in Shane's eyes had knocked some sense into him. Maybe the man I'd raised was still buried somewhere under all that arrogance and greed. I turned around, ready to forgive him, ready to hug him and work things out like fathers and sons should. Instead, he held out his hand. "Give me the keys." "What?" I asked, confused. "The keys to the truck, Dad. Hand them over." That's when reality hit me like a freight train. He wasn't coming to apologize. He was coming to take away the last shred of independence I had left. "Nolan, this is my truck. I bought this truck 20 years ago with money I earned. And who pays for the gas?" He stepped closer, using his height to intimidate me. "Who pays for the insurance? Who pays for the repairs? I do. Everything you have is because of me, Dad. You live in my house, eat my food, drive a truck that I maintain. And tonight, you embarrassed me. You made me look cheap in front of investors who control millions of dollars in freight contracts." He was talking to me like I was a child caught stealing cookies. This from the boy I'd taught to drive in this very parking lot 20 years ago. "You're grounded," he said, and I swear he wasn't joking. "From tomorrow, you stay on the property. You don't leave without permission. And that $400 a month? Consider it canceled. You don't need money since you clearly don't know how to spend it appropriately." Then he snatched the keys right out of my hand. That's when I knew for certain. War had been declared. I stood there in that parking lot watching my son walk away, twirling my keys on his finger like some kind of trophy. The Dallas night was getting cold, and I had a 6-mile walk ahead of me to the house in Preston Hollow. But you know what? I didn't feel the cold. I didn't feel tired. For the first time in 3 years, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. Clarity. See, there's something about being pushed past your breaking point that either destroys you or awakens something dangerous inside you. And let me tell you, I didn't survive Vietnam and build a multi-million-dollar company by rolling over when bullies came calling. I started walking, but not like some defeated old man shuffling home with his tail between his legs. I walked with the rhythm of a guy who'd negotiated with union leaders on the Houston docks. I walked with the pace of a man who'd survived the Tet Offensive and turned a single Peterbilt into a fleet of 200 trucks. The whole way home, my mind was working, planning, calculating. See, Nolan made one critical mistake tonight. He assumed I was powerless. He thought the old man was broken, dependent, grateful for whatever scraps he threw my way. What he didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment for months. You remember I mentioned Crystal died 3 years ago? Well, before she passed, she made me promise something. "Wade," she said, holding my hand in that hospital bed, "you're too trusting. You always see the best in people, especially Nolan. But sometimes people will take advantage of that goodness. Promise me you'll protect yourself." I thought she was just worried about my grief, about me making bad decisions while I was mourning her. But Crystal was smarter than that. She'd seen things in our son that I'd been too blind to notice. The way he looked at our assets like they were already his. The way he talked about when you're gone like he was planning a vacation. So 6 months after her funeral, when Nolan started making his moves to control my life, I did something that would either save me or destroy everything. I called my old friend and lawyer, Reed Patterson. Reed and I go way back. Served together in the 1st Infantry Division, got wounded in the same firefight, came home and built our careers side by side. If there's one man in this world I trust completely, it's Reed. When I told him about my growing concerns about Nolan, he listened without judgment. "Wade," he said finally, "I've been worried about this for a while. The way Nolan talks about the business, about you, it's not healthy. We need to put some safeguards in place." That's when Reed explained something called a revocable living trust. Sounds fancy, but it's actually pretty simple. Basically, everything I owned, the company, the house, the bank accounts, everything, would be placed in this trust. Nolan could benefit from it, even run things, but he wouldn't actually own anything. I would remain the grantor, which meant I could revoke the whole thing at any time for any reason. Reed called it the Doomsday Clause. "Think of it as a dead man's switch," Reed explained. "If Nolan treats you right, respects you, takes care of you, then he inherits everything when you're gone. But if he ever crosses the line, if he ever treats you like a burden instead of his father, you can pull the plug and take it all back." At the time, I hoped I'd never need to use it. I signed those papers thinking they were just insurance, protection against some hypothetical future where my son might lose his way. Well, hypothetical just became reality. I reached the estate around midnight. 8-foot iron gates, manicured lawns, a house worth $2.8 million that used to feel like home but now felt like a prison. Nolan and Tiffany lived in the main house with its 6 bedrooms and marble floors. Me? I got the converted garage apartment with concrete floors and the smell of motor oil that never quite went away. Tiffany had suggested the arrangement, claiming it would be easier for me. No stairs to climb, closer to my workshop. But we all knew the truth. They wanted me close enough to use as a free babysitter when convenient, but far enough away that they didn't have to see my face every morning. I let myself into my little apartment. 2 rooms, cast-off furniture from when they redecorated the main house, and a single bed that creaked every time I rolled over. For 3 years, this had felt like defeat. Tonight, it felt like a command center. I walked over to my old workbench, the one thing I'd insisted on keeping from my workshop days. Hidden in the bottom drawer, wrapped in an oiled cloth, was a small black device that looked like a garage door opener. It wasn't. It was a secure access key to encrypted files that only Reed and I knew about. The trust documents, the account numbers, the ownership records, the doomsday clause that could end my son's little empire with the push of a button. I pulled out my old laptop, the one Nolan thought was broken because I'd told him the screen was acting up. Truth was, it worked perfectly. It was a military-grade, satellite-linked machine that could access secure networks from anywhere in the world. Perks of having government contracts for 30 years. I booted it up and inserted the access key. The screen glowed blue in my dark apartment, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt like Wade Carson again. Not the broken-down charity case living in the garage, but the man who'd built an empire from nothing. I looked at the secure satellite phone hidden inside a hollowed-out repair manual on my shelf. One call to Reed, and I could destroy everything Nolan thought he owned. One call, and my ungrateful son would wake up tomorrow as poor as I'd been when I started with that first Peterbilt. But first, I needed to think this through. Because once I made this call, there would be no going back. The question was, did my son deserve mercy or justice? After tonight, after watching him humiliate me and break his own child's heart, I knew the answer. I picked up that satellite phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in months. It rang once before Reed's gravelly voice answered. Yes. It's Wade, I said simply. There was a pause. Reed had been expecting this call for a long time. Is it time? It's time, I said, staring at the picture of Crystal on my workbench. She was smiling in that photo, taken on our 35th wedding anniversary. If she could see what our son had become, it would break her heart all over again. Nolan crossed the line tonight, Reed. He humiliated me in public, hurt his own son, and told me to stop wasting his money. I heard the familiar sound of Reed lighting one of his cigars. Even at midnight, the man was ready for business. What are your instructions, Wade? Execute the doomsday clause, I said. I want it all back. The company, the house, the accounts. Every penny. And the liquid assets? Move them, I ordered. Empty the operating accounts. Empty the personal checking. Empty the savings. Transfer the $2.8 million in liquid cash to the offshore holding in the Cayman Islands. Leave him with nothing but the change in his pockets. And the house? It belongs to the trust, I said. Eviction notice immediately. Very well, it'll be done by 8 o'clock a.m. What about you, Wade? I'm disappearing, I said. I'm taking that crumpled bond and I'm gone. Need extraction? Reed asked, slipping back into our old military jargon. Negative. I've got this handled. Just make sure those accounts are dry before he tries to buy his morning coffee. Consider it done, old friend. I hung up and closed the laptop. I didn't pack clothes or photos. I didn't take anything that would remind me of these past 3 years of humiliation. Instead, I walked over to the small trash can where I'd carefully placed the crumpled $100 bond after retrieving it from that champagne bucket. I smoothed it out on my workbench. It was stained and wrinkled, but still valid. Still worth something, unlike the relationship with my son. I placed it in the center of my pillow, then wrote a simple note on a piece of paper. You said it was your money, Nolan. You were wrong. It was never your money. It was mine, and now I'm taking it back. I left the note next to the bond and walked out, into the Dallas night. Past the garage where Nolan's collection of vehicles slept. Past the pool where Tiffany threw her pretentious parties. Out the gate and into the darkness, not looking back once. By sunrise, my son would wake up a poor man, and I would be a ghost. Now let me tell you what was happening back at the house while I was sitting in an all-night diner across town, drinking coffee and waiting for the show to begin. Nolan had always been a creature of routine. Every morning at exactly 7 o'clock a.m., he'd wake up in those Egyptian cotton sheets and ring the little bell on his nightstand. For 3 years, that had been my cue to stumble out of the garage, grind fresh coffee beans, and deliver his perfect double-shot latte to his bedside. This morning, that bell rang into silence. I can picture him lying there, waiting. Ring again. Still nothing. Getting annoyed now, probably cursing under his breath about the lazy old man who couldn't even handle simple tasks anymore. Finally, he'd throw off those covers and storm down to the kitchen, expecting to find me there so he could unleash one of his trademark lectures about responsibility and gratitude. But the kitchen would be dark, cold, no coffee brewing, no breakfast waiting, just silence. That's when he'd grab his phone to check his banking app, probably planning to dock my allowance for this latest failure. Face ID would recognize him. The loading screen would spin, and then the numbers would appear. Checking account, $0. Savings account, $0. Investment portfolio, locked. Contact administrator. I imagined the color draining from his face, the phone slipping from his hands, the dawning realization that his world had just collapsed. But wait, it gets better. See, while Nolan was discovering his new financial reality, Tiffany was upstairs taking one of her famous hour-long showers. She liked the water scalding hot, liked to pretend she was at some fancy spa instead of just washing off yesterday's makeup and lies. Problem was, the utilities weren't in Nolan's name. They were in the name of the Carson Family Trust, and Reed was nothing if not thorough. Water pressure dying, lights flickering, heated floors turning cold, Tiffany screaming, "Nolan! What's happening? Fix this!" That's when they'd both realize the old man wasn't just missing. He was nowhere to be found. They'd run down to the garage, ready to blame me for everything, ready to demand I fix their problems. Instead, they'd find an empty room, a wrinkled bond, and a note that would change their lives forever. The game had begun, and I was already 3 moves ahead. By 8:30 that morning, I was sitting in a booth at Mel's Diner on Greenville Avenue, drinking black coffee and watching the news on the TV mounted in the corner. The waitress kept refilling my cup, probably wondering why this old guy was grinning like he'd just won the lottery. If she only knew. My phone buzzed with a text from Reed. Package delivered. Target acquired all. Contents. Requesting immediate consultation with legal counsel. Translation. Nolan had found his lawyer and was losing his mind. See, here's what I knew would happen next. Nolan would try to call the banks, try to reverse the transactions, try to use his charm and business connections to fix this obvious mistake. But the banks don't answer to CEOs. They answer to trustees. And I was the trustee. Next, he'd try to call Reed directly, demanding answers, threatening lawsuits, probably screaming about how this was all some senile old man's confused mistake. Reed would listen patiently, then explain in his calm lawyer voice that under Section 14, Paragraph B of the Carson Family Trust, the grantor reserved the right to remove any beneficiary who displayed gross misconduct or moral turpitude. Publicly humiliating your father at a birthday party? That qualified. But I knew my son better than Reed did. Nolan wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. He was the type to escalate, to fight dirty, to look for any angle that might get him back on top. That's exactly what happened. Around 10 a.m., my secure phone rang. It was Reed, and he sounded concerned. "Wade, we have a problem. Nolan just hired Bryce Russo." I knew that name. Russo was a disgraced private investigator who'd been kicked off the Dallas PD for planting evidence. The kind of guy who'd do anything for money and ask questions later. "What's he want Russo to do?" I asked, though I had a pretty good idea. "Find you. Nolan's telling people you've had a mental breakdown, that you're confused and dangerous to yourself. He's planning to have you declared incompetent and committed." There it was. When you can't win legally, you go medical. Have the old man declared mentally unfit, get power of attorney, reverse all the transactions, and lock me away in some care facility where I can't cause any more trouble. It was actually a pretty smart plan. Evil, but smart. "There's more," Reed continued. "He's got some quack doctor lined up, a guy named Dr. Bryce Kellerman. Lost his license twice for overprescribing medication, but somehow always finds his way back into practice. The kind of doctor who'll sign any paperwork if the price is right." I felt that familiar coldness settle in my chest, the same feeling I'd had in Vietnam when enemy mortars started falling close to our position, when survival meant thinking 3 steps ahead of people who wanted you dead. "Reed," I said, "I need you to do something for me. Leak my location." "What?" "Wade, that's exactly what they want. If Russo finds me where I want him to find me, then I control the situation," I interrupted. "Trust me on this one, old friend. We're going to give them exactly what they think they want." The plan was simple, really. You want to catch a rat, you need the right kind of cheese. And I knew exactly what kind of cheese would bring my son running. I spent the rest of the day setting up shop in the penthouse suite of the Adolphus Hotel. One of the perks of having $2.8 million in liquid assets is that you can afford the best accommodations while you plan your next move. But around 6 p.m., something happened that changed everything. My secure phone buzzed with an alert from the security system I'd had installed at the house months ago. Motion sensors in Shane's room. At first, I figured it was just Tiffany checking on him, maybe putting him to bed early after the chaos of the day. Then I saw the video feed. Nolan was in Shane's room holding his phone, recording, and he was making my grandson cry. Not just cry, he was pinching the boy's arm hard enough to leave marks, while coaching him to beg for his grandfather to come home. Say it louder, Shane. Grandpa needs to hear how scared you are. Say, Grandpa, please come home, I miss you so much. Shane was sobbing, real tears of pain and fear, while his own father used his distress to create a propaganda video. That's when I realized this wasn't just about money anymore. This wasn't just about respect or family dynamics or who controlled what assets. This was about a man who would hurt a child to get what he wanted. I called Reed immediately. Change of plans, I said, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. We're not just taking his money, we're taking everything. I want criminal charges. I want him in prison, and I want Shane away from both of them permanently. Wade, are you sure? Once we go down this road, he put his hands on that boy to hurt him, Reed, for a video, to manipulate me. There was silence on the other end of the line. I'll make the calls, Reed said finally, but we'll need evidence. Real evidence that will hold up in court. Don't worry about evidence, I said, watching the video replay on my screen. I'm going to hand-deliver them all the evidence they need. The gloves were coming off. That video went viral within hours. By 9 p.m., every major news station in Dallas was running it. Grandfather missing, family desperate for answers. There was Shane, tears streaming down his face, begging for his grandpa to come home. There was Nolan, playing the distraught son, talking about his father's declining mental health and how worried the family was. The bastard was good, I'll give him that. He knew exactly how to spin the story. Poor confused grandfather with dementia, wandering around Dallas, probably dangerous to himself and others. Loving son just trying to get his father the medical help he needed. What the viewers didn't see was the bruise on Shane's arm where Nolan had pinched him. What they didn't hear was the coaching, the threats, the manipulation. They just saw a scared little boy and assumed it was because his grandfather was missing. But I saw the truth, and I was recording everything. See, here's something about being in the freight business for 30 years. You learn that information is more valuable than money. You learn to document everything, keep records of every conversation, every transaction, every handshake deal. It's saved my ass more times than I can count. So when I had that security system installed in the house for everyone's safety, I made sure it captured audio too. Crystal thought I was being paranoid. Turns out, I was being smart. Now I had video evidence of Nolan abusing his own son. Audio recordings of him plotting with Dr. Kellerman about having me committed. Bank records showing 3 years of financial abuse, and best of all, I had a plan to get him to confess to everything on camera. Reed called me around 10 p.m. Wade, this is getting out of hand. The police are involved now, missing persons case. They're going to start looking for you seriously. Good, I said. Let them look. In fact, make it easier for them. What are you talking about? Call that private investigator Russo. Anonymous tip. Tell him someone saw me checking into Methodist Dallas Medical Center under a false name. Tell him I looked confused, disoriented, asking for my son. Reed was quiet for a long moment. You want to lure them to the hospital? Exactly. A hospital is a controlled environment. Security cameras everywhere. Medical staff to witness whatever happens. And most importantly, real doctors who can testify that there's nothing wrong with my mental state. This is risky, Wade. If something goes wrong... Something already went wrong, I interrupted. The moment my son put his hands on that boy to hurt him, everything changed. This isn't about money anymore, Reed. This is about saving Shane from growing up in a house with monsters. I spent the next few hours coordinating with Reed and his contacts. Turns out, when you've been doing business in Dallas for 30 years, you accumulate a lot of favors from a lot of people. The hospital administrator owed me for a hefty donation to their children's wing. The chief of security was a former Army buddy. Even Judge Amber Richardson had reasons to take my calls. Her campaign fund had benefited from my contributions more than once. By midnight, the trap was set. Methodist Dallas Medical Center would be our stage. Plainclothes officers would be positioned throughout the hospital. Security cameras would capture everything. And if Nolan brought a syringe full of sedatives to inject an innocent man, well, that would be attempted assault with a deadly weapon. But here's what I was really counting on: Nolan's arrogance. See, my son had spent 3 years treating me like I was senile, broken down, helpless. He genuinely believed I was just a confused old man who'd gotten lucky with some paperwork. He had no idea he was walking into an ambush. The call came at 6 a.m. Reed's voice was tense. They took the bait. Russo contacted Nolan an hour ago. They're mobilizing. Nolan, Tiffany, Dr. Kellerman, and they're bringing Shane. They're bringing the boy? That wasn't part of the plan. Nolan wants him there for the emotional manipulation. Figures seeing Shane will make you more compliant, more willing to sign whatever papers they put in front of you. I felt that familiar rage building in my chest. The man was going to traumatize his own son to control me. Reed, I want extra security on that boy. The moment they walk into that hospital, I want Shane protected. Whatever happens to Nolan and Tiffany, that child doesn't get hurt. Already arranged. Child Protective Services will have a worker on standby. The moment we have evidence of abuse, Shane goes into protective custody. I hung up and put on my best suit, the charcoal wool one I'd worn to board meetings back when I actually ran my company. I looked in the mirror and saw Wade Carson, businessman, veteran, grandfather. Not the broken-down charity case who'd been living in that garage. Today, my son was going to meet the real me for the first time in 3 years. And he was going to learn why you don't mess with a man who has nothing left to lose except his grandson's future. The war was about to begin. The Methodist Dallas Medical Center was buzzing with morning activity when I arrived at 7:30 a.m. Nurses changing shifts, doctors making rounds, families visiting loved ones. Normal people living normal lives, having no idea they were about to witness the destruction of a family. I went straight to Dr. Martinez's office, the hospital administrator who owed me more favors than he could count. Good man, ran a tight ship, and understood the value of discretion. "Wade," he said, shaking my hand nervously. "This is highly irregular, using my hospital for whatever this is." "It's justice, Carlos," I said, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. "And don't worry about the irregularity. The endowment I promised for the new pediatric wing, double it." His eyebrows shot up. That was $2 million he was looking at, enough to fund the entire children's cancer treatment center he'd been dreaming about. "Very well," he said. "My security team is briefed. We have plainclothes officers positioned throughout the building. Your lawyer's people are monitoring all entrances." I nodded and checked my watch. Based on Russo's tip, they should be arriving any minute now. I walked over to the bank of security monitors that lined Carlos's wall, 12 screens showing different angles of the hospital, lobby, elevators, parking garage, emergency room, and there they were. A beat-up rental sedan careened into the drop-off zone, tires squealing as it jumped the curb. The driver's door flew open and out stepped my son. He looked like hell, unshaven, wearing yesterday's clothes, wild-eyed with desperation. 3 days without access to his money had apparently been enough to break his usual polished veneer. Tiffany emerged from the passenger side, dragging Shane by the hand. My grandson looked terrified, confused, probably wondering why his parents had woken him up at dawn and driven him to a hospital. The bruise on his arm was clearly visible, even on the grainy security footage. And finally, from the back seat, Dr. Kellerman slithered out carrying his black medical bag like some kind of poisonous snake ready to strike. "Showtime," I muttered, standing up and buttoning my jacket. I took the elevator down to the solarium, a wide open space on the 3rd floor filled with plants and natural light, perfect for what I had planned. Reed was already there, along with Detective Morrison from Dallas PD and a woman from Child Protective Services. "They just entered the building," Reed reported. "Nolan's asking at the reception desk about his confused father who checked in under a false name." Perfect. The receptionist, who I'd briefed personally, would send them to the solarium where their senile father was supposedly waiting under medical observation. "Positions, everyone," I said. Detective Morrison wheeled himself into a corner, wrapped in a hospital blanket, looking for all the world like a patient recovering from surgery. The CPS worker positioned herself near the elevator with a direct line of sight to Shane. Reed faded back into the shadows with his legal documents ready. And me? I stood right in the center of the room, hands clasped behind my back, waiting. The elevator dinged. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Nolan's heavy breathing, Tiffany's heels clicking on the linoleum, Shane's small feet trying to keep up. They burst through the double doors like a SWAT team raiding a crack house. "Where is he?" Nolan shouted, scanning the room frantically. "Dad! Dad, we're here to help you!" His eyes found me standing in the center of the solarium, and for just a moment, relief flooded his face. There was the confused old man he'd come to collect. There was his ticket back to financial freedom. Then he really looked at me. I wasn't hunched over in confusion. I wasn't wearing the cheap clothes of a homeless wanderer. I was standing straight, wearing a $3,000 suit, looking like the CEO I'd been for 30 years. I looked like the man who owned the building we were standing in. "Hello, Nolan," I said calmly. "Looking for someone?" The confusion in his eyes was beautiful to watch. This wasn't the script he'd rehearsed. This wasn't the senile father he'd expected to find. "Dad," he started, trying to recover, putting on that concerned son voice he'd perfected. "Thank God we found you. You wandered off. You're not well. We brought Dr. Kellerman to help." Behind him, Kellerman was fumbling with his medical bag, pulling out a loaded syringe. The plan was simple: sedate the old man before he could protest, get him to sign power of attorney documents while he was drugged, then commit him to a care facility where he couldn't cause any more trouble. "You brought a doctor," I said, my eyes flicking to the syringe. "Or did you bring an executioner?" That's when Nolan realized something was very, very wrong. "Do it," he hissed to Kellerman. "Do it now, before someone comes." Kellerman lunged forward with the needle, aiming for what he thought was a helpless old man. That's when Detective Morrison threw off his blanket and tackled him. "Dallas PD, drop the weapon!" The syringe went flying, clattering across the floor as Morrison slammed Kellerman face first into the tile. And that's when my son finally understood. He'd walked into a trap. The solarium erupted into controlled chaos. More officers poured through the doors. They'd been positioned in the hallway waiting for my signal. Detective Morrison had Kellerman pinned to the floor, the would-be doctor screaming about his rights while handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Tiffany was backing toward the elevator, her face pale with terror. "I didn't know," she screamed. "I didn't know what they were planning." But she wasn't backing away fast enough. Officer Sarah Martinez Ann stepped out from behind a pillar and grabbed her arm. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for conspiracy and child endangerment." "Child endangerment?" Tiffany shrieked. "I'm his mother. I have rights." That's when the CPS worker stepped forward, kneeling down next to Shane. My grandson was standing frozen in the middle of this nightmare, tears streaming down his face, probably thinking his whole world was falling apart. "Hey there, Shane," the social worker said gently. "My name is Mrs. Patterson. I'm here to make sure you're safe, okay?" She carefully examined the bruise on his arm, photographing it with her phone while speaking in soothing tones. Shane looked around frantically until his eyes found mine. "Grandpa," he whispered. I wanted to run to him, to hold him, to promise him everything would be okay. But I knew this had to play out exactly right if I was going to protect him permanently. Nolan was backed against the glass wall, his hands raised, shaking like a leaf. "This is insane," he yelled. "I'm trying to help my father. He's sick. He needs medical attention." "Save it," Detective Morrison said, hauling Kellerman to his feet. "We've got everything on tape. The conspiracy, the child abuse, the attempted assault with that syringe." "What tape?" Nolan demanded. "You can't record private family conversations." That's when I pulled out my phone and hit play. The audio was crystal clear, recorded just 48 hours earlier in the cheap motel room where they'd been staying after I froze their accounts. Nolan's voice filled the solarium. We pump him full of sedatives. We make him compliant. We put a pen in his hand and guide his signature. Once we have power of attorney, we reverse everything. Then we put him in a facility where he can't cause any more trouble. Tiffany's voice chimed in. "What if he fights the injection?" "He won't fight anything once Kellerman gets that needle in him," Nolan replied. "The old man will spend the rest of his days drooling in a wheelchair." The silence that followed was deafening. Every cop in that room was looking at Nolan like he was something they'd scrape off their shoes. But I wasn't done yet. "Play the second recording, Reed," I said. Reed stepped forward with his tablet, pressing play on another audio file. This one was from the security system in Shane's bedroom. Nolan's voice again. "Cry harder, Shane. If Grandpa thinks you're really hurt, he'll come back. Say it again. Grandpa, I'm scared. Please come home." Shane's sobbing voice. "It hurts, Daddy. Please stop pinching me. I don't care if it hurts. Do you want Grandpa to come back or not? Now cry!" The sound of Shane's genuine pain and terror echoed through the solarium. Several of the officers had to look away. Detective Morrison turned to Nolan with disgust written all over his face. "Nolan Carson, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit assault, child abuse, financial fraud, and attempted kidnapping of a vulnerable adult." As they cuffed him, Nolan finally broke. The confident CEO facade crumbled, and what was left was a desperate, pathetic man who'd gambled everything and lost. "Dad, please," he begged as they dragged him toward the elevator. "I'm your son. You can't do this to me. I was just trying to protect you." I looked at him, really looked at him, for what I knew would be the last time. "You're not my son," I said quietly. My son would never hurt a child to get what he wanted. The elevator doors closed on his screaming, and for the first time in 3 years, the building felt peaceful. But we weren't done yet. Reed appeared at my elbow with a thick folder. "Wade, we need to move quickly on the custody petition. With both parents in jail, Shane needs a legal guardian immediately." I looked over at my grandson, who was now sitting in a chair while Mrs. Patterson gently cleaned the scrape on his knee. Apparently, Nolan had been rougher than I'd realized. "What do we need?" I asked. "Emergency hearing. Judge Richardson is standing by. She's cleared her calendar for this afternoon. We'll need character witnesses, financial statements, and evidence of the parents' unfitness." "Evidence we've got in spades," I said grimly. "What about character witnesses?" Reed smiled for the first time all day. "Wade, you've been doing business in Dallas for 30 years. Half the city council owes you favors. Your pastor from First Methodist, 3 former employees who'll testify to your character, and Colonel Martinez from the VA hospital who can speak to your mental fitness." I nodded. This was war, and I was fighting with every weapon in my arsenal. "There's something else," Reed continued, lowering his voice. "Something we need to discuss privately. About Nolan's parentage." My blood went cold. "What about it?" "The DNA test from 33 years ago. Crystal made me promise to keep it sealed until she died. But if Nolan tries to challenge the trust dissolution based on blood relationship..." I understood. The final weapon in my arsenal. The one I'd hoped never to use. "Is it still sealed?" I asked. "Waiting for your orders." I looked at Shane, who was now drawing pictures with crayons Mrs. Patterson had given him. Such an innocent kid caught in the middle of adult ugliness he couldn't possibly understand. "Keep it sealed for now," I decided. "But if Nolan pushes this to trial, if he tries to use his blood relationship to claim rights to Shane or the company, then we drop that bomb." Reed nodded. "Understood. Let's go get ready for court." The war was far from over. The Dallas County Family Court was packed tighter than a Sunday service at First Baptist. Word had gotten out about the transport tycoon custody battle, and every ambulance-chasing reporter in Texas had shown up with cameras and notepads. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Reed, watching Nolan's high-priced legal team scramble to put together some kind of defense. They'd managed to get him out on bail, probably mortgaged whatever assets I hadn't frozen yet, and cleaned him up enough to look respectable in his navy suit and conservative tie. But you could see the desperation in his eyes. The man was drowning and grasping for any rope that might save him. Judge Richardson took her seat at exactly 2:00 p.m. Amber Richardson, 15 years on the bench, tough as nails and smart as a whip. She'd seen every kind of family ugliness this city could produce, and she didn't suffer fools gladly. "This is an emergency hearing for temporary custody of Shane Carson, age 10, she announced. "Mr. Reed Patterson representing the petitioner, Wade Carson. Mr. Marcus Blackwood representing the respondents, Nolan and Tiffany Carson." Blackwood stood up first. He was expensive. The kind of lawyer you hire when money's no object and winning is everything. Slicked back hair, $5,000 suit, and the moral flexibility of a weather vane. "Your Honor," Blackwood began, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "This is a tragedy masquerading as a legal proceeding. My client, Mr. Nolan Carson, has spent the last 3 years caring for his aging father while building one of Dallas's most successful freight companies. Yesterday, that same father, suffering from clear signs of dementia and paranoid delusions, used his residual corporate access to financially devastate his own family. I had to hand it to him. He was good. The way he spun it, I was the villain and Nolan was the victim. Mr. Carson was so concerned about his father's declining mental state that he sought professional medical intervention," Blackwood continued. "For this act of filial devotion, he was arrested and charged with conspiracy. Meanwhile, his confused father has kidnapped his own grandson and is attempting to use the court system to legitimize this abduction. Judge Richardson was taking notes, her expression unreadable. I could see why Nolan had hired this guy. He was making their insane plot sound almost reasonable. Then Reed stood up. "Your Honor," Reed said, his voice carrying the authority of 40 years in courtrooms, "Mr. Blackwood is asking you to believe that a man who built a $15 million company from a single truck, who served his country with distinction in Vietnam, who has been managing complex business operations for 3 decades, suddenly became incompetent overnight." Reed walked over to the evidence table. What actually happened is that Nolan Carson engaged in a systematic campaign of financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and ultimately child abuse to steal his father's life's work. He picked up a tablet and pressed play. The audio recording of Nolan's conspiracy with Dr. Kellerman filled the courtroom. "We pump him full of sedatives. We make him compliant." When Nolan's voice described keeping me drooling in a wheelchair, I saw several jurors flinch. Judge Richardson's expression hardened, but Blackwood wasn't done fighting. "Your Honor," he interrupted, "these recordings were obtained illegally. They're inadmissible under Texas privacy laws." "Actually, they're not," Reed replied smoothly. "Mr. Wade Carson installed a security system in his own home for safety purposes. Under Texas Penal Code Section 16.02, it's perfectly legal to record conversations in your own residence. Strike one for Blackwood." Reed continued his presentation, methodically destroying every argument Nolan's team could muster. Financial records showing the embezzlement. Medical evaluations proving my mental competency. Character witnesses testifying to Nolan's increasingly erratic behavior over the past 3 years. But the killing blow came when Reed played the recording of Nolan coaching Shane to cry. "It hurts, Daddy. Please stop pinching me. I don't care if it hurts. Do you want Grandpa to come back or not? Now cry." The silence in that courtroom was absolute. Judge Richardson was staring at Nolan like he was something poisonous that had crawled out from under a rock. That's when Blackwood played his final card. "Your Honor," he said, standing up with a file in his hand, "there's something this court needs to know. Something that changes the entire nature of these proceedings." I felt Reed tense beside me. We both knew what was coming. Mr. Wade Carson is not biologically related to my client. DNA testing performed 33 years ago proves conclusively that Nolan Carson is not Wade Carson's biological son. Therefore, any claim to inheritance, any family relationship, any standing in this court is based on a lie. The courtroom erupted. Reporters were scribbling furiously, cameras were flashing, and the bailiff was calling for order. Judge Richardson banged her gavel hard enough to crack wood. "Order! Order in my courtroom!" I looked at Nolan. He was staring at me with a mixture of triumph and hatred, probably thinking he'd just played his ace in the hole. Poor bastard had no idea what he'd just unleashed. Reed was already on his feet. "Your Honor, if Mr. Blackwood wishes to introduce the topic of biological relationships, we're happy to address it fully." He walked over to our evidence table and picked up a sealed envelope, one that had been sitting there unopened for 33 years. "Mr. Carson has known about his son's parentage since 1991, Reed announced. His wife, Crystal Carson, confessed to an affair shortly after Nolan's birth. Despite this knowledge, Mr. Carson chose to raise this boy as his own son, to give him his name, his love, and eventually his life's work." Reed's voice grew stronger. "For 33 years, Wade Carson kept this secret to protect his wife's memory and his son's feelings. He asked for nothing in return except basic human respect and decency. He looked directly at Nolan. Instead, he received abuse, theft, and ultimately, an attack on an innocent child." Judge Richardson leaned forward. "Mr. Carson, is this true? You've known all along?" I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of 3 decades of silence lifting from my shoulders. "Yes, Your Honor. I've known since the day he was born that Nolan wasn't my biological son. And for 33 years, that didn't matter to me. He was my boy, and I loved him like my own blood." I paused, looking at Nolan one last time. But blood doesn't make a family. Love does. And yesterday, he killed that love when he hurt Shane. The gavel came down like thunder. Judge Richardson didn't need to deliberate. The evidence was overwhelming, the audio recordings were damning, and Nolan's own lawyer had just handed her the final piece of the puzzle. Emergency custody is hereby granted to Wade Carson, she announced, her gavel echoing through the packed courtroom. The biological relationship is irrelevant to this court's decision. What matters is the welfare of the child and the demonstrated fitness of the guardian. She turned her steely gaze to Nolan. Mr. Carson, you have systematically abused your father financially, emotionally, and legally. You have endangered your own child for personal gain. You have conspired to commit assault against a vulnerable adult. Bail is hereby revoked pending criminal trial. Nolan's face went white as the bailiffs moved toward him. Your Honor, please. I have rights. He's not even my real father. You're absolutely right, Judge Richardson replied coldly, which means you have no claim whatsoever to his assets, his property, or his grandson. Bailiff, remove this man from my courtroom. As they dragged Nolan away in handcuffs, he was screaming threats, promises, desperate pleas for mercy. But his voice faded as the courtroom doors closed behind him. Tiffany tried to make one last play. Your Honor, she called out, I'm Shane's mother. I have maternal rights. Judge Richardson consulted her notes. Mrs. Carson, you stood by while your husband abused your child for a propaganda video. You participated in a conspiracy to drug and kidnap an elderly man. Your maternal rights are hereby terminated. You'll be lucky if you avoid prison time. And just like that, it was over. 3 years of humiliation, abuse, and theft ended with the bang of a gavel. But the real moment came when Shane ran across that courtroom and threw himself into my arms. Grandpa, he sobbed, holding on to me like I was the only solid thing in his collapsing world. I was so scared. Daddy hurt me and said it was your fault. I knelt down to his level, looking into those innocent eyes that had seen too much ugliness for a 10-year-old. Shane, listen to me. None of this was your fault, and your daddy made some very bad choices, but you're safe now, okay? Grandpa's going to take care of you. Forever? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Forever, I promised. Now, you might think that's where this story ends. Good guys win, bad guys go to jail, happy ending all around. But real life isn't that simple, especially when you're dealing with family. The next 6 months were the hardest of my life, not because of the legal battles, those were straightforward. Nolan got 15 years for conspiracy, assault, and child endangerment. Tiffany got 12 years for her role in the scheme. Dr. Kellerman lost his license permanently and got 5 years for attempted assault with a deadly weapon. No, the hard part was helping Shane heal. That boy had been living in a house where love was conditional, where affection was a transaction, where his own parents saw him as a tool to be used rather than a child to be cherished. It took months of therapy, patience, and more bedtime stories than I could count to help him understand what real family looked like. We moved out of that Preston Hollow mansion, too many bad memories, and bought a small ranch outside of Dallas. Nothing fancy, just 20 acres with a creek running through it and enough space for a boy to grow up without feeling trapped. Shane took to ranch life like he'd been born to it. Within a month, he was helping me feed the horses, learning to fish in our pond, and asking 1,000 questions about everything from diesel engines to cattle ranching. Grandpa, he said one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, why did Daddy hurt people? It was the question I'd been dreading and expecting in equal measure. Some people, Shane, they get so focused on what they want that they forget about what's right. Your daddy, he wanted money and power more than he wanted to be a good man. But you had money and power too, Shane pointed out with the brutal logic of childhood. I did, I agreed. But I learned something important from my time in the Army and from building the company, and especially from your Grandma Crystal. Money and power are just tools. What matters is how you use them. I ruffled his hair. Your daddy used them to hurt people. I'm trying to use them to help people, especially you. That conversation happened 2 years ago. Shane's 12 now, and if you met him, you'd never guess the trauma he went through. He's got his grandfather's stubborn streak and his grandmother's kind heart. He's on a roll at his new school, captain of the Little League team, and he's been pestering me to teach him to drive the tractor. The company's doing better than ever under professional management. Turns out, when you're not embezzling funds for personal luxuries, a business tends to thrive. I kept my promise to Crystal. Southwest Transport Solutions employs over 400 people now, and every one of them gets a Christmas bonus and full health benefits. As for Nolan and Tiffany, they're still in prison. Nolan writes letters sometimes, begging for forgiveness, promising he's changed, asking to see Shane. I file those letters in the trash can, unopened. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. But here's what I learned through all of this. Family isn't about blood. It's not about DNA or legal documents or who shares your last name. Family is about showing up. It's about sacrifice. It's about putting someone else's needs ahead of your own, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I'm 62 now and Shane keeps me young. Yesterday he asked if he could work at the company someday, maybe learn the business from the ground up like I did. We'll see, I told him. But if you do, you're starting in the warehouse, not the boardroom. You're going to learn what every job feels like before you even think about telling other people how to do theirs. He grinned at that. Yes, sir, Grandpa. And for the first time in years, the future looks bright. Some stories end with revenge. This one ends with redemption.